Hi, it's me, the storyteller. Thank you for joining me. Most of the stories on this channel are based on actual events, and some aren't. I'll let you decide if these stories are fiction, or if they're not. It wasn't unusual for Sarah to be left in charge. She was 17, old enough to stay home while her parents went out for their anniversary, dinner and a night at a downtown hotel. They'd been planning it for weeks. Sarah had rolled her eyes at their giddy goodbyes, but secretly, she didn't mind. Her younger siblings, Chloe and Liam, were easier these days. Dinner, a movie, lights out by 10. By 10:30, the house was quiet. The rain outside had picked up, steady and rhythmic, tapping lightly against the windows, like a ticking clock. Sarah had cleaned up the dishes, dimmed the kitchen lights, and curled up on the living room couch with a blanket. The soft glow of the TV flickered on her face, casting pale blue light across the darkened room. A sitcom rerun played low, more for noise than entertainment. It was rare to be in the house with this much stillness. It felt peaceful, settled. Still, she couldn't shake the sense that something felt off. Her mind wandered a moment, then she brushed it off. The knock came just after 11. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Sarah sat up, her heart skipping. No one ever came by this late. She paused the TV and listened. Nothing followed, just the rain and her own breathing. She stood, padded quietly toward the front door, and flipped on the porch light. Through the peephole, she saw him. A man stood just outside the door, under the awning. He wore a dark hoodie and a baseball cap pulled low, obscuring his eyes. His face was pale, and in his hands he held a crinkled Uber Eats bag. Sarah blinked. They hadn't ordered anything. She didn't open the door. She hesitated, heart tapping fast in her chest, then called through it, telling him they hadn't ordered food. Maybe he had the wrong address. He didn't respond. He just stood there, motionless, that bag dangling from one hand. And then she noticed his mouth, twisted into a grin. It was too wide, unnaturally so. Not a friendly smile, not even a forced one. Just too many teeth, too much tension. Like it was stitched onto his face and he didn't quite know how to use it. A chill ran down her spine. She backed away, double-checked the lock, and stood frozen in the hallway, phone in hand. Her fingers felt numb. It was the way he hadn't blinked, the way he hadn't answered, that stupid smile. After what felt like forever, she peeked back through the peephole. He was gone. Sarah checked the side door, the back, locked, secure. Her nerves began to settle just enough to catch her breath. She told herself it was a mistake, some delivery mix-up. Maybe he was high, or maybe just weird. But that grin clung to her thoughts like burrs on skin. Around midnight, she tiptoed down the hallway to check on the kids. Chloe had kicked off her covers again. Sarah gently tucked them back over her and listened to Liam's soft breathing. They looked so peaceful, so unaware. She stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching, letting herself believe it was all fine. That's when she heard it, tapping, coming from the living room window in a slow, deliberate rhythm. Her chest tightened, blood rushing in her ears. The place had shifted. What had been peaceful now felt like the walls were pressing in. The rain blurred everything outside, and the tapping came again. She crept forward, heart hammering, and eased the curtain aside. He was back, standing at the window, inches from the glass. Same clothes, same bag, same grin. His face was tilted just slightly, his head angled low, so the brim of his cap shadowed his eyes. But his mouth, that mouth, hadn't moved. Sarah let the curtain drop. Her breath hitched. Her legs felt weak. She stumbled backward, tripping over the edge of the rug, then scrambled for her phone. It nearly slipped from her hand. She unlocked it and called 911. Her voice shook as she spoke to the dispatcher. They were calm, reassuring, told her officers were already nearby and would be there in minutes. When she hung up, she immediately called her parents. She could barely explain what was happening, and they were already in the car rushing home. As quickly as she hung up, another knock, this time at the side door. A soft scrape against the frame. Then nothing. When the police arrived, the man was gone. They canvassed the property and searched the surrounding yard and hedges. It was one of the officers who spotted the Uber Eats bag lying just beneath the living room window. They picked it up with gloves, opened it. It was empty. No food, no receipt. Just a stale plastic smell and nothing else. Sarah explained everything again. Her parents arrived as the officers were finishing up. They hugged her, confused and shaken. She showed them the doorbell footage, short, grainy clips of a tall man standing on the porch, holding the plastic bag with that creepy smile wiped across his face. Authorities couldn't ID him. The brim of his hat cast a shadow over his face in every frame. The smiling man was never seen again. Tessa had done plenty of babysitting jobs in her hometown, but this one was different. A friend of her aunt's needed someone last minute for an overnight stay at their house in a quiet, woodsy part of upstate New York. The pay was unusually generous. All she had to do was watch the couple's daughter, June, who would already be asleep when she arrived. The parents would be back just after dawn. The house was large and old, colonial, with too many doors and floorboards that felt soft underfoot. There were no photos on the walls, no toys in sight, just polished wood and soft amber lighting. The couple greeted her briefly in the front hallway. They were dressed for travel, dark coats, stiff posture, expressions that hovered somewhere between polite and distracted. The mother, tall and pale with tired eyes, handed Tessa a white envelope and gestured to a folded paper on the kitchen counter. "We've left a few instructions for the night," she said. Her voice was careful, neutral. Tessa glanced at the envelope. $200 in cash. Seemed like a lot for just one night, she thought. She then looked at the printed page on the kitchen counter that read, "Instructions for the babysitter," printed in a clean serif font. She gave a small laugh, light and unsure. Neither of them smiled. They thanked her again and stepped out the front door. The mother lingered for just a second longer. Then she, too, was gone. Tessa stood alone in the kitchen, still holding the envelope. A faint breeze moved through the hallway, even though every window was closed. Something about the couple's silence unsettled her. Not rude, not unkind, just distant, like they were trying not to say something. She turned back to the paper and sat down to read. "Do not enter June's room after 8 p.m. under any circumstances. Ignore any knocking at the front or back doors after 10 p.m. We don't expect anyone. If you hear June crying, check the baby monitor. If she's not visible on the screen, do not go upstairs. Keep the hallway light outside her room turned on at all times. At 11:45 p.m., place the raw steak in the refrigerator on the white plate. Leave it at the end of the hallway, beside the coat rack. Do not look down the hall once it's placed. Just turn off the light and walk away. If you hear whispering between 12 a.m. and 12:15 a.m., lock yourself in the downstairs bathroom until it stops. Do not answer any voice that sounds like June's if it comes from the vents. Tessa read the list twice, then a third time. She laughed nervously, looked around, and opened the fridge. Sure enough, there was a raw steak on a plate, saran wrapped. A little too deliberate to be a joke. She left it alone. June's room was upstairs, near the end of a long hallway that stayed dark no matter how many light switches Tessa tried. The hallway light just outside the door worked, though, dim and yellow like an old candle. June's door was closed. The baby monitor showed a toddler bed, blankets curled into a soft lump, a mop of hair barely visible above the sheets. No movement, no sound. Tessa left the monitor on the coffee table and curled up on the couch. By 10:06 p.m., the first knock came. 3 gentle taps at the front door. She didn't move. A second knock followed, slightly louder. It was happening just as described on the paper. Tessa's throat tightened. She swallowed hard and waited. Silence. When her heart dropped to a normal rate again, Tessa walked into the kitchen. She took the steak from the fridge, unwrapped it, and placed it on the white plate. Her hands were shaking slightly, and she told herself it was ridiculous, that someone was messing with her. But she walked upstairs anyway, laid the plate gently on the floor beside the coat rack at the end of the hallway. She caught herself peeking down the hallway and quickly looked away. The darkness past the plate looked dense, too dense, even with the light still on. She walked back downstairs and didn't look back. At 12:03 a.m., the whispering started. It seemed to come from inside the walls, no single direction. The vents hissed. Words formed and dissolved again. Tessa held her breath, then locked herself in the bathroom. The sound went on for 9 minutes. When she finally emerged, the hallway light upstairs was off. She checked the monitor. Still showed June, unmoving. But the angle was slightly different now, tilted like the camera had shifted. The lump in the bed was smaller. At 12:40 a.m., she heard crying. Not through the monitor, but through the ceiling above the living room. Soft and slow. Tessa stood in the middle of the living room for several minutes, staring up at the ceiling. Then she went upstairs. She knew she shouldn't. But the silence that followed the crying felt worse. Felt wrong. At the top of the stairs, the hallway light flickered. The steak was gone. The plate had been shattered. Glass and juice smeared across the wood like something had been dragged. June's door creaked open. Tessa stepped closer. Inside, the room was freezing. The bed was empty. Just the soft click of something moving inside the air vent near the baseboard. She leaned down slowly. A child's voice came from inside. "Tessa, it's cold in here. Can you help me?" She turned and ran, down the stairs, through the hallway, out into the night without her coat or her shoes. She waited by the end of the driveway, phone shaking in her hand. She debated on calling the parents, then decided against it. The wind howled. Tessa looked up. Something moved behind the curtain of the upstairs window. She sat in her car, awake the rest of the night, watching and waiting. The parents returned just after dawn. Tessa thanked them for the opportunity and quickly drove away. Tessa doesn't babysit anymore, at least for families she doesn't already know. But sometimes, when she is sitting in her apartment, late at night, she'll swear she hears a child's voice through the vents, still asking for help. Megan hadn't planned on taking any more house-sitting gigs. Not after the last one, a weekend stay in a dusty Victorian where the owners, quote, forgot to mention the raccoons in the attic and the neighbor who liked to stare through the kitchen window. But money was tight, and this one paid unusually well for just one night. No kids, no pets, and no responsibilities besides being present. She told herself it was harmless, maybe even relaxing. Still, something about the listing stuck in her mind. The pay, the location, the odd lack of detail. But she ignored the unease, just like she'd ignored the growing pile of unopened bills and the missed calls from her ex. It was only one night. She'd bring snacks, stream a show, sleep late, and be done with it. She arrived just before sunset, just as the sky turned a shade of bruised lavender, hinting at an approaching storm. The drive had been long and mostly empty, miles of pine-lined highway and a winding gravel road that looked like it hadn't seen a car in weeks. The house, nestled at the end of a long driveway and surrounded by a skeletal forest, promised solitude. Its wraparound porch sagged in places, and every window was hidden behind heavy curtains. Inside, the air was thick and stale, with a faint odor of cloves and old fabric. The furniture looked antique and expensive, untouched by dust. Family portraits lined the walls, but the faces were oddly formal, distant somehow, like they'd been painted from memory instead of life. A note on the kitchen counter sat beside a skeleton key and a laminated sheet titled Important Nightly Instructions. Megan read it once, then again, slower the second time. The rules felt absurd at first. Lock every door and window by 9 p.m., close all curtains, bolt the basement door twice, and never open it. At 11 p.m., a figure might appear at the top of the stairs. Do not acknowledge it. Do not speak to it. Do not stare for more than 10 seconds. The rest of the list read like ritual prep. Turn on the hall lamp. Stay quiet if it flickers. Lie down if footsteps follow. No mention of what would happen if she broke the rules. She nearly left right then. But the money was already promised, and walking out would mean driving 2 hours in the dark back to her one-bedroom apartment, where loneliness pressed just as hard. At 9 p.m., Megan locked up. Every latch, every curtain. The basement door, warm to the touch. She bolted, then tested twice. She wandered the house with a bag of popcorn in one hand, her phone in the other, trying to distract herself with social media. The signal dropped as the wind picked up, and shadows gathered early across the floor. The hours crept. Every sound, the house's settling frame, the groan of wood shifting under old nails, echoed sharper than it should. At one point, she heard faint whispering upstairs. Another time, a single loud thump, like a heavy book had fallen just beyond her line of sight. At 10:55, she sat on the living room floor with her back to the hallway, eyes fixed on her phone. She didn't hear footsteps. She didn't hear a door creak open. She only felt it, the shift in pressure, the way her breath hitched for no reason, the sudden silence behind her that felt too still. She turned her head. At the top of the stairs stood the figure. It didn't move, didn't sway, just a silhouette, darker than the darkness around it, a hollowed-out shape that didn't reflect light, like a void in the air. Her instincts screamed to run, but her body refused. She counted seconds under her breath. 3, 4, 5, but curiosity overruled fear. She slowly raised her phone and tapped the camera, the lens aimed just high enough to capture the hallway. The shutter clicked. The screen flashed. The figure disappeared. In its place, a low hum began to build. The light in the hallway flickered. Then the lamp clicked off entirely. The hum shifted into a vibration, The floor beneath her trembled, then stopped. A creak echoed from the stairs. Footsteps, heavy, just one step at a time. Megan's phone slipped from her hand as she lowered herself flat against the floor. Her pulse thundered in her ears. Something warm passed near her shoulder. She felt a breath, impossibly cold, brush her cheek. She tensed, made herself completely still, and didn't dare open her eyes. The footsteps circled her once, paused, then faded slowly back toward the stairs. She stayed frozen for what felt like hours. By morning, the air had gone still. The lamp had returned to its steady glow. Her phone showed a single photo, blurry, too dark to make anything out, but in the center was a warped smudge, like something had stood just out of frame. The next morning, Megan packed quickly and left. When she returned home to her apartment, she couldn't shake the feeling that a presence had followed her home. The Vermont home sat in the hills near Lake Willoughby, hidden behind overgrown shrubs that reached the first floor windows. Claire, who had done this job several times before, always parked in the same gravel pullout, let herself in through the side gate, and greeted the two dogs who waited with frantic tails. It was a house she should have been comfortable in by now. But there was one room she never liked. It was meant to be a guest room, small, with faded blue walls and an antique dresser that smelled of cedar and age. But what drew attention immediately, without fail, sat near the far wall. A wooden rocking horse, not quite life-sized, about half that, but still big enough to be mistaken for a child's ride-on toy. It was clearly old, heavy, and expensive-looking. The craftsmanship was unsettling in its precision. The mane was coarse and graying, and the eyes were small, dark marbles set too deep in the sockets. Its mouth was open, the teeth carved and yellowed. The whole thing sat in permanent motion, as if caught mid-sway. The owners never mentioned it, not once. Claire simply avoided the room, kept the door shut, and didn't think too hard about why she felt better when the door stayed locked at night. The first night of this particular stay was uneventful. She fed the dogs, watched a movie, fell asleep on the couch. The next morning, while making coffee, she noticed the door to the guest room was open. That was unusual. She clearly remembered closing it the night before. She always did. She approached it slowly, calling for the dogs, hoping one of them had nudged it open. But both dogs were outside, visible through the kitchen window, dozing in the yard. The hallway was still, the guest room colder than the rest of the house. Morning light spilled across the floor, just enough to see the rocking horse. It had moved. It now faced the doorway, angled slightly, as if it had been watching the living room through the cracked door. She shut the door again, firmly, and twisted the lock. For the rest of the day, she stayed downstairs, tried not to think about it. She blamed her nerves, her imagination, the way certain objects just made people uncomfortable. It was only a piece of carved wood. That night, as she passed the hallway on her way to bed, the guest room door was ajar again, only an inch, but enough to see the dark outline inside. She didn't approach, just kept walking, pulled the bedroom door closed behind her, and shoved a chair against the knob. The dogs, who usually slept at the foot of the bed, refused to enter the room. They whimpered once, then curled up in the hall. She dreamed of hooves on the floorboards, a low creaking noise, breathing that wasn't hers. The next morning, the bedroom door was open. The chair lay tipped on its side. The dogs were gone, found a few minutes later huddled behind the couch, shaking. One of them had soiled the carpet. In the hallway, muddy hoof-shaped prints led from the guest room to the bedroom door. Small, like a child's toy, but distinct. The rocking horse now sat in the center of the guest room, facing outward, directly toward the bedroom. She tried calling the owners. No answer. She thought of leaving. Her bag was already in the car, but the contract stated she'd be paid only if the full 3 nights were completed, and the house sat so far from town that the idea of driving back alone at night suddenly felt worse. That evening, the door refused to lock. No matter how hard she turned the knob or slid the bolt, it clicked back open behind her, as though the house itself had decided. She dragged a bookcase in front of the door instead. Just past midnight, she heard something shift on the floor above her, a scraping sound, then a rhythmic creaking, like wood on wood. Then it stopped. She sat upright on the couch, heart pounding. The dogs whined softly beside her. Then the sound came again, closer. Hooves on the stairs, one step at a time, steady, inevitable. She turned off the TV, held her breath. The floorboard just outside the living room flexed under weight, but no one was there. Then the whispering began, faint and high-pitched, like a child practicing words underwater. She could make out only one thing repeated again and again. Back and forth, back and forth. She didn't sleep. She waited until the sky turned light and the house grew quiet again. When the owners returned on the 4th day, Claire handed them the keys, avoided eye contact, and didn't say a word about the guest room. She never went back. Months later, she received a text message from them. They were redecorating and clearing out old furniture, finally getting rid of the rocking horse. They asked if she wanted it, or knew anyone that would. Claire's heart nearly skipped a beat at just the thought of that rocking horse. She answered that no one came to mind, then thanked them for thinking of her, but politely declined the offer. She silently hoped to never see that rocking horse ever again. Maya had done plenty of house-sitting before, some for family friends, others for strangers who left long checklists and overfed pets. This one was easy, an older couple heading to Europe for 12 days, 2 cats to feed, mail to bring in, and a little house cleaning. The house was small, single-story, tucked at the edge of a quiet, rural neighborhood. A little outdated, but safe for all intensive purposes. That sense didn't last long. From the very first night, Maya noticed the cats behaving strangely. They would sit and stare at empty corners, hiss toward vents, or suddenly bolt down the hall like something unseen had startled them. She assumed they were reacting to being around someone new, but their behavior never improved. The unease settled in slowly. A shirt she'd laid on the bed disappeared, then reappeared in the laundry basket the next day. She figured she must have tossed it there without realizing. A light she knew she'd turned off was back on when she returned from a walk. A spoon she left in the sink later showed up in the dishwasher. Just small things, too small to matter, until they added up. By the 3rd night, she swore she heard footsteps, soft ones, muffled by floorboards, somewhere toward the back of the house. She couldn't quite tell. She checked the hallway, heart pounding, phone light trembling in her hand. But nothing. She blamed the heating system, the house settling, anything to calm her mind. Still, she began locking the bedroom door at night. By the 5th day, more of her clothes were missing. Odd pieces, a pair of pajama shorts, one of her bras, a tank top. She checked the dryer, the closet, even the trash. Nothing. She told herself she must have packed less than she remembered. That night, she barely slept. The cats paced across the foot of the bed. At one point, she thought she heard whispering in the hallway. But when she sat up, the sound stopped. On the seventh night, while brushing her teeth, she thought she saw movement in the mirror, just behind her, a flicker of motion. At this point, she thought she was going crazy. That morning, the pantry door was slightly open. A box of cereal had been nudged sideways. Worse, the back door was unlocked and slightly ajar. She thought about calling the police, but was afraid the cops would chalk it up to a typical paranoid female jumping at shadows. She checked every inch of the house. Closets, the garage, even the crawl space hatch in the laundry room floor, though it was screwed shut from the inside, so she didn't bother. Still, she stared at it for a long time, long enough to notice how the air felt colder there. That night, she poured a glass of wine with dinner to try and settle her nerves. As she scrolled through her phone, she heard a soft thump from the laundry room. One of the cats jumped and hissed. The other took off down the hall. She stood slowly and stepped toward the back of the house. That was when the man grabbed her. It happened too fast to process, arms wrapping around her from behind, pulling her off balance. She struggled, elbowed backward, scratched, twisted. The man let out a low grunt and she broke free, sprinting barefoot toward the front door. He chased her. Maya tore down the front steps, screaming for help. Two men working on a truck 3 houses down looked up just in time to see her running, followed by a pale, rail-thin figure stumbling through the yard behind her. They ran over and tackled him in the street. He didn't fight back, just shook and whimpered as they pinned him down and called the police. He was wearing only her missing bra and underwear. When they asked Maya if she knew who he was, she could barely speak. When the police arrived and searched the house, they found the crawlspace panel pried open from the inside. Below, a flashlight, food wrappers, a nest of blankets, a water jug, a small mirror, and the rest of Maya's missing clothes. The smell was unbearable. The man had been using an old coffee can as a toilet. The man was found to be mentally unwell, wandered from his caregiver's home, and had been without his meds living there for weeks. He was taken to a more secure facility where he could get the care he needed. After learning all of this, Maya decided not to press charges out of compassion for the man. The owners returned a few days later. They changed the locks, sealed the crawl space, apologized profusely. A month later, she got a job at a local coffee shop, something busy, filled with people. And eventually, she overcame the quiet trauma she experienced, and that was enough to feel normal again. Maya hasn't taken any more house-sitting jobs since. If you enjoyed these stories, please consider subscribing to the channel. Give it a like, a comment, and maybe a share. But if you didn't like the stories, maybe share them with someone you don't like. In any case, I'm glad you stuck around to the end.